Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks. I have something a little bit different for you today. This is not R.L. Stine. Instead, it's Christopher Pike. I got started on Christopher Pike right after I got done with R.L. Stine. I think I saw someone reading the last vampire series on the bus or something, and I was asking her what was it about, and she told me, and it's a 6-part series. I picked it up, I read it, I fell in love with it. I highly recommend it. It sets the gold standard as far as vampire lore is concerned in fiction. So once I was finished with those books, I started on the rest of his catalog, and I stumbled across Monster. That is today's book. Monster is fantastic. It starts off extremely strong, and it does not let up the entire novel. This is expertly written, well executed, superbly crafted, fantastic fiction. This is 10 out of 10. It doesn't get any better than this. From Christopher Pike, from R.L. Stine, from anybody. This is a must-read YA horror novel. There is a bit of swearing in here and some sex, so it's a bit more adult than the usual Fear Street novels where they kind of allude to sex but don't really talk about it, and no one ever swears in Fear Street. This is a true Halloween tale of horror, and I cannot wait to get started. So let's begin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. What should I do next? I don't know. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine and now Christopher Pike. Thank you very much for listening, and let's get started. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Monster by Christopher Pike. Chapter 1. It began with blood. It would end the same way. Angela Warner was on the couch finishing her third beer when Mary Blank entered Jim Klein's house carrying a loaded shotgun. The time was close to 10. Jim's party should have been good for another 2 hours. Angela was having a great time. The party was the first she'd been invited to since she moved to the small town of Point the previous June. It was now late September. School had started a couple of weeks earlier, and Angela saw her invitation as a sign that she had finally been accepted into the local social scene, especially since it had been Jim Klein who had invited her. Stud football jock Jim, possibly the most handsome guy in the school. Yet Angela had not let the gesture go to her head. She knew better than anyone that Jim belonged to Mary. Beautiful, confident Mary, Angela's best friend in the whole town. Mary, the one with the loaded shotgun. "Hi, Mary," Angela said, as her friend burst through the front door. A nice normal hi it was, but that was only because Angela's mouth was ahead of her eyes. When she saw the shotgun, she couldn't think of anything to add to her greeting. Her eyes followed only the gun. She watched with great interest as Mary raised the weapon and pointed it at Todd Green's midsection. Angela had only met Todd that night. He was a linebacker on Point High's football team and seemed like an okay guy. Just before Mary pulled the trigger, Angela had the ridiculous thought that Mary sure knew how to liven up a party. Mary shot Todd directly in the belly. The blast went right through his guts and painted the wall behind him a lumpy red. Todd groaned and slumped to the floor. A stunned silence choked the crowd of about 30. No one moved except Mary. She pumped her shotgun and whirled in the direction of the kitchen. She didn't go far. Apparently she didn't have to. Between Mary and the kitchen stood Kathy Baker, head cheerleader for Point High. Kathy was a blonde piece of cream pie. All the boys loved her, and as far as Angela had been able to ascertain, Kathy loved a number of the boys. She was young and fresh and had the face of a model. Mary pointed her shotgun at Kathy's face and pulled the trigger. The blast caught Kathy in the forehead and took off the top of her skull, plastering a good portion of her brains over the railings of the nearby staircase. Kathy, her dead body, flew backward and landed with a muted thump on the carpet. The shocked silence thickened. Mary pumped her shotgun once more, and her eyes, like twin lasers, searched up the stairs. Angela studied with dreamlike fascination the look in Mary's eyes. She was still seated on the couch in the living room, not far from the front door and Todd's messy remains, her empty beer can still in her hands. Mary was 15 feet away, off to her left. Yet, Angela could have had Mary's head under a microscope. She could see so much detail. Mary's pupils were wide, but not crazed. They scanned the visible portion of the second floor with fixed calculation. Mary had her mouth closed. She was breathing through her nose, steadily and deeply. She had just blown away 2 people, but she seemed to be in total control. Mary was not yet done. Someone stepped to the edge of the stairway railing on the second floor and peered down. It took Angela a moment to register that it was Jim Klein. Angela's eyes jumped from Jim to Mary, then back and forth once more. Jim's handsome jaw dropped a couple of inches. A hard line appeared in the center of Mary's forehead. Angela sat up straighter as Mary once more raised a shotgun to her shoulder. Everyone else at the party continued to stand and watch and do nothing. The suddenness of the attack had to be to blame. 6 seconds couldn't have passed since Mary had come through the front door. Angela was barely on her feet and stepping toward Mary when Mary pulled the trigger for the 3rd time. "Stop!" Angela screamed. The shot missed. Jim had leapt back just as Mary took aim. The buckshot exploded a crater in the 2nd-story ceiling. Smoky white plaster drifted through the air. Jim was now out of sight, probably running for the nearest exit. Angela doubted he was going to make it. She watched as Mary swore under her breath, pumped the shotgun again, and leapt onto the stairway, taking 3 stairs at a time. I must stop her now, Angela thought. The stairway, made up of 3 right-angle sets of carpeted steps, described a rough spiral as it made its way to the 2nd floor. As Mary scampered onto the first landing, Angela was able to reach through the painted white posts of the stairway to grab Mary's right leg above the ankle. Mary tripped and crashed to her knees, momentarily losing her grip on the shotgun. Angela was smart. She immediately let go of Mary, grabbed the barrel of the gun, and began to pull it through the posts. Mary could chase Jim all she wanted, Angela thought, but if she didn't have anything to kill him with, it wouldn't matter. It was a sound strategy. Until Mary kicked Angela in the face with her right foot. "Don't," Mary swore at her. "Ah!" Angela moaned, losing her hold on the gun and taking a step back. She tasted blood in her mouth as the room spun in a dizzy circle. But her vision was still sharp enough to record Mary's reclaiming the gun and continuing up the stairs. Angela literally willed her dizziness to pass. She knew she didn't have time to circle the stairway and start up at the proper place. She wasn't a big or strong girl, but she had always been an excellent athlete. Reaching up with both hands and springing off her feet, she grabbed the posts and, in a single fluid movement, yanked herself up and over the railing. Mary was already off the stairs and running down the upstairs hallway that led to the bedrooms. She was definitely after Jim. She had pushed between a couple of petrified girls without saying so much as boo to them. Angela couldn't see Jim, but assumed he had barricaded himself in one of the rooms. "Somebody stop her!" Angela cried. The paralysis caused by the gruesome deaths had finally begun to lift. Statues were melting. A couple guys from the living room headed for the stairs to help her. The majority were running out the front and back doors, though. People were making noises, mainly gulping, crying sounds. The 2 girls in the upstairs hallway were still in the silent whimpering stage. They weren't going to do anything to attract Mary's attention, and the guys coming up the stairs weren't going to get to Mary before she got off another shot, Angela saw. I have to stop her, Angela thought again, going after her. Mary was at the closed door at the end of the hallway, trying the handle. It was locked. She didn't waste time pounding on the door or asking Jim to open it for her. She retreated a couple of steps, pointed the barrel at the doorknob, and blew it away. The act took a couple of seconds, however, and she was just kicking the door open when Angela crashed into her from behind. "Leave me!" Mary yelled at her as they toppled onto the floor of the master bedroom. Angela felt as if she had hold of a wild animal. They were both approximately the same size, but Mary tossed her off easily. Angela rolled on the carpet and struck her head on the bottom of the open door. Again, stars swam in her vision. She caught a glimpse of Jim at the window, and then one of Mary climbing to her feet and pumping the shotgun once more. Angela had to turn away momentarily to get her arms under herself so she could get up. During that moment, an explosion of shattering glass from another shot rent the air. This can't be happening. Angela hadn't been standing so close to Mary on the previous shots. But now Mary was only 4 feet away, and the noise from the gun was deafening. Angela's hands flew to her ears. It was too late to block out the blast. Perhaps she was trying to block out the madness. Mary hastened to the ruined window and torn curtains and stared out into the night. Disgust crossed her features, and Angela realized that the window had shattered because Jim had dived through it, not because of Mary's shot. Mary raised her gun to her shoulder, started to pump the gun, then must have thought better of it. Jim had to be out of range. Mary whirled and stomped toward the bedroom door. Angela grabbed at her as she passed, but Mary raised the stock of the shotgun, and Angela let go, cowering beneath the anticipated blow. She slipped back down onto the floor, yet Mary didn't hit her. She just ran out the door to take off after Jim, her boyfriend. God, Angela whispered. She didn't know how long she sat there on the floor. It might have been a few seconds or a few minutes later that the two guys from downstairs entered the room and helped her to her feet. They were both the color of chalk and, like Angela, were trembling. Did they stop her? Angela croaked. The bigger guy shook his head. Angela had been introduced to him earlier, but the excitement of the evening had somehow caused her to forget his name. She got away, he said. Did Jim? She asked. The guy shook his head. I don't know. They both ran into the field, in the direction of the lake. The guy tilted his head to the side. A siren was approaching in the distance. Sounds like the police, he said. Angela took a breath and hurried downstairs. Todd and Kathy lay where they had fallen. Angela tried not to look, but did anyway. Kathy's head was a lopsided red ball. The shot that had caught Todd had cut him almost in half. The blood of the victims had combined into an expanding river. It was everywhere. Angela's shoes were soaked in it. She ran out of the house and onto the front yard. The bulk of the party was now standing in the driveway or on the lawn. Guys were throwing up and girls were passing out. Wails tore the air. 2 cop cars, their flashing red lights spinning, came to a halt at the end of the driveway. 4 cops jumped out. The kids who were still coherent pointed in the direction of the field. They went that way, they cried. The officers didn't know what they were talking about. Angela had yet to catch her breath, but she ran to the nearest cop. He was Asian, in plain clothes. Although he was short and lightly built, it was clear at a glance that he was in charge. He steadied her by the shoulders as she started to collapse in his arms. What happened? He demanded. She shot 2 kids, Angela moaned. Where? She gestured weakly. In the house? Who shot them? The man asked. My friend, Mary. What is she armed with? A shotgun. She's not inside now? No, Angela said. The man glanced in the direction of the field, which led to the woods that surrounded most of Point Lake. Angela knew the area well. She lived on the opposite side of the lake with her grandfather. If Jim could reach the trees before Mary cut him down, he'd have a chance. The man gestured one of the uniformed officers into the house. He listened for a moment to the babble surrounding him, and seemed to understand the general situation. Several kids were describing Mary. Who's she chasing? The man asked Angela. Jim, her boyfriend. Why? I don't know why. To kill him? She's already taken 2 shots at him. Is he wounded? I don't know. How many shots did Mary fire altogether? Angela had to think. 5. She'll have to reload, the man muttered. He motioned the other 2 officers to his side. Do you know why she killed the other 2? No, Angela said. She just burst into the party and started shooting. Do you live around here? Yes. In your opinion, which direction will the boy run? Angela didn't hesitate. Toward the south end of the lake. The trees are thickest there. Does Mary know that? I'm sure she does. Can we take our cars across this field? He asked, pointing. No. Right away you'd run into a couple of wooden fences. The man nodded to his partners. They drew their guns. Then we'll go on foot, he said. When we get to the trees, we'll spread out, circle around. He turned away. We'll get her. Angela grabbed his arm. What are you going to do? The man spoke firmly. We're going to stop her. You can't kill her. We'll try our best to have her surrender peacefully. But she won't surrender. Something's happened to her. She doesn't know what she's doing. The man gently undid her grip. She's killed 2 already. She's trying to kill a 3rd. We must stop her, whatever it takes. Angela wouldn't give up. Then take me with you. She's my friend. She'll listen to me. The man and his partners were anxious to get going. Did she listen to you inside the house? No, she didn't. You can't come. I'm responsible for your safety. He turned away. Stay here. Keep the rest of your friends together. We'll be back. But, Angela began. Stay, the man called. He and his partners were already running into the field. There was no moon. It was not long before they disappeared in the dark. She just met the guy, but she knew he was competent. Then she remembered the resolve in Mary's eyes. The cops would probably have to kill her. No, Angela said to herself. No. Something wasn't right, besides the obvious. Mary was not crazy. Angela had only known her 3 months, but they spent a lot of time together in that period. Why, Angela had stayed at her house several times, and they talked late into the night. Mary was a strong girl. She had strong opinions, but she was intelligent. Her eyes were open, and she had plans for the future. She wasn't one to throw her life away in a wave of rash emotion. Yet she had just shot 2 people. Wasted them. Todd and Kathy. Those 2 in particular. Now she wanted Jim. Angela knew Mary and Jim hadn't been getting along lately, but from the bits Mary had dropped, it didn't sound that serious. Angela had had no idea Mary wanted to break up with him, never mind blow his brains out. Angela made a quick decision. A car couldn't cross the field, but she might be able to get to the wooded area where Mary had gone before the police did if she drove around the entire lake and came at it from the other side. She'd arrived at the party late. Her car was parked halfway down the block and it wasn't hemmed in. But how will you stop her? You've tried twice already. She could accidentally kill you while trying to kill Jim. Angela decided to risk it. She couldn't let Mary die. She raced down the block to her brand new dark green Toyota Camry, a present from her father to try to make up for all the pain he caused her by divorcing her mother. She hadn't seen either of her parents since the previous June. The car started immediately, and Angela peeled rubber as she pulled off from the curb. At first, she headed away from the field and Point Lake toward View Street, where it was the only road that circled the lake. When she caught it a few minutes later, she upped her speed to 70, the body of water on her right now. Point Lake was over a quarter of a mile across, almost a perfect circle of deep blue water. Even though her own grandfather's house sat on the shore of the lake, Angela had never gone swimming in it. The water remained remarkably cold even during the hot Michigan summer days. She reached the wooded area south of the lake a few minutes later and parked near the water behind a grove of trees. Getting out of her car, Angela was struck by the fact that she might be in as much danger from the police as Mary. They both had short brown hair and were about the same height. The police could shoot her thinking she was Mary. Angela quickly pushed the thought away. The plainclothesman who had spoken to her wouldn't shoot without giving either of them a chance to surrender. Angela strode briskly into the trees. The place was a favorite of hers. Only a short distance from her grandfather's house, she often went there to hike. In fact, she had been there only a week earlier with Mary. Mary had been unusually silent, as if she had a lot on her mind. If only Angela had probed her silence, perhaps tonight could have been avoided. Angela had to fight down a sudden wave of nausea. Todd's intestines slipping down the walls. Bits of Kathy's brain smeared on the railing and floor. It was too much. "Mary," Angela whispered. "Why?" Then she raised her hand to her mouth and called, "Mary! Mary! It's me, Angela!" Her voice faintly echoed back to her through the pine trees and out over the water. It was a warm night, the air strangely still. She moved deeper into the trees away from the water, alternately jogging and walking. This is crazy, she thought. Jim might not even have come this way. Mary might have already blown his head off. Angela Warner could be next on the list. Yet Angela didn't really believe that. Mary wanted Jim Klein. She wanted him bad. Jim and Todd and Kathy. What did those 3 have in common? Jim and Todd were football players, Kathy a cheerleader. Used to be. That wasn't much of a pattern. Angela felt sick when she thought of Todd and Kathy's parents hearing about their kids. It was ironic. Angela was originally from Chicago. One of the reasons she had decided to come live with her grandfather in Point for her final year of high school was to be in a peaceful environment. Her parents' wars, as their marriage was collapsing, had etched a deep disdain for strife into her heart. And now she was in this nice small town for only 3 months and saw 2 people killed right in front of her. "Mary!" she called again. A hand reached out from behind a tree and closed off her mouth. Angela silently shrieked. "Don't tell her where we are," a voice hissed in her ear. It was Jim. Angela relaxed as he slowly eased his hand off her face. He raised a finger to his lips. She got the picture. "Is she near?" she whispered. "I think so," he whispered back. He was breathing hard. She could smell the sweat pouring off him. He glanced around nervously. "Christ," he muttered. The police should be here in a few minutes, Angela said softly. He nodded vigorously. Good. What the hell is going on? I wish I knew. Who did she get downstairs? Todd and Kathy, she said. They're dead. Angela shivered. They're real dead. God. She must have a reason for this. Jim snorted quietly. She's lost it. It's as simple as that. Did you see it coming? No, he said. Angela thought she heard something, but could see nothing in the dark. You know, maybe we shouldn't wait for the police. My car isn't far from here. Why didn't you say so? Let's get out of here. They crept back the way she had come. She hoped she was going the right way. The woods looked much different at night. They came to a clearing she couldn't remember crossing, and hesitated at the edge of it. Maybe we should stick to the trees, Angela said. Where's your car? Jim demanded. I'm beginning to wonder, Angela muttered. Dry grass cracked nearby. Angela froze. Jim turned around anxiously. Yet they could see nothing. He raised a finger to his lips again, and Angela nodded slightly. It could have been the wind. Except the wind didn't manually pump a shotgun. They heard the distinctive snap. Don't move, Mary ordered. Angela was surprised Mary hadn't fired without announcing her presence. But when Mary did not immediately appear, Angela realized her friend had been too far away to get off a clean shot. She must have figured she wouldn't be able to creep any closer without their hearing her. Angela remembered the plainclothesman's comment about having to reload. Mary might have been down to her last shell. Angela glanced at Jim. She kept expecting him to bolt, but he understood his dilemma. He didn't know which way to run. Mary had spoken little, and the trees did funny things with sound. It was impossible to tell exactly where she was approaching from. Still, Angela thought, there was no point in waiting for Mary. She had made her intentions clear at the party. Angela realized that Jim must have simply frozen with fear. Go! Angela hissed at him. No, Mary said from behind them. Angela turned in time to see Mary raise the shotgun to her shoulder. She was approximately 30 feet away and had a few low-hanging branches in her path to them. She took a step closer. Stay, Mary said. Wait, Angela cried, jumping in front of Jim, who was taking the short, rapid breaths of a man on the verge of collapsing. Mary took another step toward them. Get out of the way, Angie, Mary said, her voice cold. I'm not going to let you kill him, Angela yelled. She spoke as loud as she could, hoping to alert the police to their whereabouts. Mary continued to approach. I have to kill him, Mary said. Why? Angela pleaded. Because he's not human, Mary said. Talk sense, Angela said. Think what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Mary said. She motioned her friend to move to the side with the barrel of the gun. Get out of my way, Angie. I mean it. No, she said. Mary was angry. You don't understand. I have to do this. This is your last chance. I'll kill you if I have to get to him. Angela glanced over her shoulder at Jim. He wasn't holding on to her, but he was cowering behind her, using her as a human shield. She didn't blame him one bit. He had the meadow at his back, but it was too late to run now. Mary would cut him down before he got 10 feet. Angela was surprised he wasn't begging Mary for mercy. Angela turned back to Mary and stared at her straight in the eye. Mary couldn't have been more than 15 feet away. There were no more branches between them. You're my friend, Angela said. I don't believe you'd kill me. Mary thought for a moment. It seemed she was on the verge of listening to reason. Angela even began to relax slightly, but then Mary's grip on the weapon tightened. I'm sorry, Angie, she said with genuine sorrow in her voice. There are things in this world that are more important than friendship. She's going to shoot. I'm going to die. Angela couldn't believe it was really happening. She closed her eyes and said goodbye to the world Mary said she didn't understand. But the fatal blast never came. Hold it, a male voice ordered. Don't move an inch. Angela opened her eyes. Mary was still in the same spot, her head motionless, but her eyes were darting left and right. Angela recognized the voice as belonging to the plainclothes cop she had spoken to at Jim's house, but the woods could have been enchanted, because once more she couldn't tell which direction the voice was coming from. The man appeared to understand that and made no effort to come into view. Set the shotgun down on the ground, he ordered. Slowly. Mary continued to scan the area, not moving. Do it, the officer said firmly. Mary took a deep breath. She had guts, even if she did have a screw loose. I can't see you, she said. I don't know if you can see me. I can see you very well, the officer said matter-of-factly. Mary's head tilted slightly to the right. Angela had finally located where he must be standing, behind a clump of bushes near the edge of the meadow. There is a reason I must kill this guy, Mary said. Fine, the officer said patiently. You can tell me about it once you've put down the shotgun. And if I don't? Mary asked. She was definitely honing in on the bushes. Angela was worried she'd try to get off a shot into them. She was tempted to speak, to warn the cop, but surely he had to be aware of the danger. I'll shoot you in the head, the cop replied. I'm an excellent shot and won't miss. Put the shotgun down now. I don't believe you, Mary said. I will give you 5 seconds, the man said calmly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait, Mary said. I'll put it down. Good, he said. No sudden movements. Mary slowly crouched down, extending the shotgun out from her body. Angela was a mass of nerves. She just kept waiting for Mary to try to shoot the cop. But then all at once, Mary let go of the shotgun and it landed on the soft leaves. Now stand up, the officer said. Put your hands on top of your head and keep them there. Mary did as she was told. The cop stepped into view, revolver in his right hand. He had been behind the bushes. Thank God, Jim whispered. He moved up beside Angela. No one move, the cop shouted. He was too late. Mary had dived behind a tree, yet she hadn't gone for the shotgun. She didn't need it because she had come to the party well equipped. Her right hand whipped behind her, and in the blink of an eye she was holding a pistol. Angela hadn't seen the second gun at the party. Mary must have had it tucked in her belt under her shirt. The cop immediately hit the ground, even though Mary didn't turn in his direction. She wanted Jim dead, only Jim. She wanted it even though it might cost her a bullet in the brain. A spark of orange fire spit in Jim's direction. Every muscle in Angela's body spasmed as Jim cried and fell to the ground. Then there came a second shot, a second cry. Mary's right hand whipped halfway around her body. Incredibly, the cop had shot the pistol out of Mary's hand. He had hit her in the hand from the sound of it. Mary was in pain, and she wasn't alone. Jim was howling on the ground at Angela's feet, clutching his left leg near the knee. At least he was still alive. Out of the corner of her eye, Angela saw the cop climb slowly to his feet. Mary still refused to give up. Regaining her balance, she dived for the fallen pistol. She squirmed through the leaves like a rabid animal. Her determination was almost supernatural. The cop rushed to her instead of shooting again, which no court of law would have blamed him for doing. I have to, Mary cried, and she found the gun in the dark. She picked it up with her right hand, which was definitely not working properly, and then transferred it to her left hand. Even though the cop was closer and an easier target, she climbed to her knees and pointed the gun at Jim. But that was as far as she got. The officer moved like a cat. He belted Mary on the top of the head with his revolver, hard. Angela heard a cracking sound. Mary dropped her gun and stared up at the officer for a moment, puzzled. But she was probably already out, because a moment later she toppled to the ground. The cop looked over at Angela and Jim. Are you all right? He asked Jim. My leg isn't, Jim complained. The man tucked his pistol in a holster inside his coat and knelt by Mary's side, checking her head. You'll recover, he said, perhaps to all of them. It's over. Yet the words didn't ring true to Angela. Deep down, she had a feeling of dread. It seemed to speak aloud inside her mind with a cruel voice. My dear, it's only just begun. Chapter 2. Angela arrived at the police station the next day close to 10. Lieutenant Nguyen, the plain-clothes cop who had saved her life the previous night, had called her an hour earlier and asked her to come in. The station was in the neighboring town of Bolton, a city 5 times larger than Point and 1/10 as beautiful. As Angela drove into town, she noted a cluster of reporters gathered on the front steps of the station. 2 teenagers butchered at a high school party? It was getting national play. Nguyen had warned her to drive around and come in the back way. He had told her that under no circumstances was she to talk to the media until she had spoken to him. That suited her fine. She had no desire to think about what had happened, never mind tell her story to People magazine. A uniformed officer let her in the back door, and a minute later she was sitting in Nguyen's office. She had to wait a minute and took that time to study the pictures on his wall. It didn't take her long to realize Nguyen had been a captain in the South Vietnamese army. From the photos, it looked as if he had been decorated a number of times. That made sense. Her contact with him had been brief, but he had struck her as brave. She was standing, studying the pictures more closely, when he came in behind her. "My wife made me hang them up," he said. Angela turned. Nguyen was a short, wiry man with a head of thick black hair, large, soft brown eyes, and a distinctive right wrist to his body. He had dashed into the field the previous night with good speed, but she could see now that his right leg had been injured at some time in the past. The leg might even have been shorter than his left. He noted her attention but didn't say anything. Angela blushed and spoke quickly. "She must be very proud of you," she said. "She is a proud lady," Nguyen agreed. He stepped farther into his office and offered his hand. "I'm happy that you were able to come down, Angela." They shook briefly. He had warm hands. "Please, have a seat." "I'm happy to still be alive," she remarked, settling herself in a chair at the front of his desk. He sat across from her. He appeared relaxed, but very much in control. She remembered again how he had shot the pistol out of Mary's hand. He was no lightweight, this guy. She added, "I have you to thank for it." "Why did you go after them when I told you to wait?" he asked, his question not demanding, just curious. "Mary's my friend." She shrugged. "I didn't know what was going to happen." "You were afraid she'd be killed?" "Yes." Nguyen nodded. "She almost was." He thought for a moment. "What you did was brave. How close are you two?" "I only met her in June when I moved here, but I've seen her several times a week since then." "I'd say we're pretty close. How is she? I mean, how's her head and hand?" "She spent the night in the hospital, but she's here now in a cell. The doctors say she has a mild concussion, and they bandaged her hand." Nguyen paused again and sighed. "But I know there's something wrong with her. Can you shed any light on why she did this?" "No." "Nothing?" Angela gestured helplessly. She had a lump in her throat the size of an orange that wouldn't go away when she swallowed. She hadn't slept well the night before. Actually, she doubted she had slept at all. Guns and blood and guts. The memories were etched in her soul. She'd be 80 years old and still remember them. "I don't know what to say," Angela replied. "Mary has been quiet the last few days, but she didn't confide to me that anything was wrong. The boy she was chasing, Jim Klein, he's her boyfriend, isn't he?" "Yes." "Have you talked to him this morning?" "Yes." Nguyen did not elaborate. Perhaps he wanted to compare their stories, see if they matched. "How's his leg?" she asked. "He's up and around. He'll be all right. How were Jim and Mary getting along before last night?" "Okay," I thought. I had noticed that Mary had begun to separate herself somewhat from him, but she never came right out and said she was upset with him. "What was her relationship to the two she killed, Kathy Baker and Todd Green?" Nguyen asked. "As far as I know, she hardly knew either of them." "But she definitely went for those two. Is that correct?" "Yes, definitely. Then she went after Jim." "Did you get the impression there was anybody else she was going to kill?" Nguyen asked. "No." "What do Jim and Kathy and Todd have in common?" "I asked myself the same question last night," Angela said. "Jim and Todd are both on the football team. Kathy's a cheerleader. All three are popular." Angela had to catch herself. She was talking as if they were still alive. She lowered her head and took a deep breath. Nguyen was sympathetic. "It's not easy to see people die," he said. She raised her eyes. They were damp. "Things like this happens to you in the war?" He took a moment to answer. "You expect it in war," he shrugged. "But it doesn't make it any easier." He looked out the window for a moment. They had a view of the back wall of a warehouse. "Do you want to talk to her?" he asked. "Mary?" "Yes." She felt weak to her stomach. "She won't talk to you?" "No. She says she has the right to remain silent. She won't even talk to her parents. She's clammed up." "Will she be let out on bail?" "I doubt it, but that's for her lawyer to arrange. I understand her family has money." "Lots," Angela said. Nguyen shook his head. "The families of her victims are crushed. Mary might be safer in jail than out. You might want to tell her that." "You're saying they might come after her?" "You never know." "What else do you want me to talk to her about?" Angela asked. "Why she did it. If she'd just tell us that, it would help." Angela glanced down at her shoes. They were different from the ones she had worn to the party the night before. She had already thrown those away. She knew she couldn't wash away the bloodstains. "Who will it help?" she asked softly. "You never know," Nagoyan said. Nagoyan led her to a small, gray box-like room with painful fluorescent lights on the ceiling. He told her he'd get Mary and left her alone for a few minutes. Angela passed the time remembering when they had first met. Those had been happy days. Angela had been in town a week, or outside of town would have been more correct. Her grandfather's house, located on the far side of the lake from Point Proper, had the body of water to keep the world away. Her grandfather was not reclusive, however. Although 72 years old, he had a flourishing social life. He loved women, and since there were few men his age who were capable of doing more than talking, the women relished him. He was in excellent health. Right from the start, he let Angela go her own way, which suited her just fine. She had been walking alone in the woods on the south side of the lake when she stumbled across Mary. Mary was dancing. She had on a skin-tight green leotard and tights and was playing her boombox at maximum volume. Angela stood and stared at Mary for several minutes before announcing her presence, but there was no rudeness in the delay. She was awestruck. Mary danced like a pro, but she wasn't an MTV clone. The way she moved between the trees, it was as if she were a Greek nymph descended to earth for an afternoon frolic. Mary was fully alive when she danced, filled with energy. Her dance was an art, and the interesting thing was that she did it to ordinary rock blasting out of the boombox. When Angela finally did speak up, Mary stopped and stared at her. She immediately turned off the music, but she wasn't embarrassed or angry. She just said, "You're new here, aren't you? My name's Mary. Want to be friends?" Mary hadn't said the latter, but she could have. She had taken Angela under her wing that very day. Angela had never met anyone with such incredible self-confidence. Too cool to care about being cool. Besides being an incredible dancer, Mary could paint, sing, and make, so she said, incredible love. Jim, she said, was the best. 3 months ago, the best. And last night she had done everything in her power to kill him. "I'll kill you if I have to get to him." Suddenly, Mary was at the door, being led inside by a uniformed officer. She sat down in a chair across from Angela. The chair was metal, bolted to the floor, and Mary was handcuffed to it with her good hand. She had already changed into prison clothes. The gray shirt and pants looked like unwashed pajamas, baggy and unflattering. Angela was appalled at the change in her friend's appearance. Ordinarily, Mary was a beauty. Her brown hair was cut short, as was Angela's, but it wasn't the same, because Mary's had that extra gloss that separated the blessed from the non-blessed. At least that was what Angela had told Mary not long after they'd met. Mary had been quick to disagree. Mary's eyes were large and liquid green, Angela's a simple blue. Mary was voluptuous. In a bathing suit, she could turn heads 100 yards away. Angela was slight and had trouble gaining weight, probably because she seldom ate much. Eating wouldn't be a priority that day. Just looking at Mary took away her appetite. Mary had a huge bandage wrapped around her head, and the doctors had not spared her hair while treating her wound. They had lopped off a handful of it right at the top. Common treatment for a murderess, Angela supposed. Her right hand was bandaged to her wrist. Nagoyan could shoot straight. Mary stared across the table at her with bloodshot eyes. "Well?" Angela said. "Well," Mary muttered. "How's your head?" "I don't know." "Does it hurt?" Angela asked. "I don't know." "Did you sleep last night?" "A little. Did you?" "Some," Angela said. "That's good. What are you doing here?" "I came to see how you're doing." "I'm all right. Anything else?" "Yeah." "What?" Mary asked. "You know what. What the hell happened?" Mary shrugged. "You were there? You saw it all." "That's not what I mean, and you know it. Why did you do it?" Mary acted bored. "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me." "Try me." "No." "Why not?" "You won't believe me." "Mary, you killed 2 people. You almost killed a third. Jim, how do you feel about that?" Mary stared at the floor. "I feel nothing." "Nothing? Not even regret? God, do you know what you've done to their families?" Mary took a breath. "I feel bad for their families. I also feel regret." Angela sighed. "I know you must." "I regret that the cops stopped me before I could get Jim." Angela was exasperated. Why? What did Jim do to you? Mary raised her eyes to Angela's. He didn't do anything to me. Angela paused. Did he do anything to anyone else? Trust me, Angie. There's no point in talking about it. What did Jim do? Angela insisted. A bitter chuckle escaped Mary. Boy, if you only knew. A remark Mary had made the previous night came back to Angela right then. Because he's not human. Not human, Angela whispered. Mary was instantly alert. What? You said last night that Jim wasn't human. No, I didn't. I heard you, Mary. I remember. Don't deny it. Why did you say that? Mary changed. No longer was she bored, indifferent, or defiant. She was pale, and her cheek twitched. She was scared. This in itself frightened Angela more than anything the previous night had. Mary turned away and pressed her hands to her face. Because it's true, she said. Angela reached across the table and touched Mary's arm. What's true? What did he do? Mary was having trouble breathing. Horrible things. Tell me? Mary slowly raised her head. You won't believe me, she said for the third time. Try me, please? I'll believe you. Mary chewed on her lower lip. She was thinking, but not normal thoughts. There was a faraway look in her eyes, and where those eyes were focused was not a happy place. Todd and Kathy, she said finally, were not human beings anymore. That's why I killed them. You mean they did something inhuman? They hurt somebody? I mean they were no longer like you and me. Angela had no idea what she was talking about. What were they then? Mary's lower lip trembled. Monsters. Mary? Mary smiled, a grotesque twisting of her face. I told you. No, tell me more. I don't understand. Mary sat back in her chair and stared at Angela. You want me to start at the beginning? Yes. It'll be a waste of time. I have plenty of time to waste. Mary closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them and began to speak, her tone was changed. She spoke softly and simply, as if she were recounting a great tragedy. You know how the cheerleaders and the football players practice before school starts at the beginning of September, Mary said. They meet and go through their routines and their plays. They do this every year. Well, this year you also know that I was seeing Jim. Sometimes I'd be bored and drive over to the school in the morning just to watch the guys bang heads. I'd watch the girls on the squad work out too. Mary shrugged. That's when I began to get a clue. A clue to what? Angela asked. Mary frowned, as if remembering her confusion at the time. I'd watch the guys, and notice how Jim and Todd stood out. I don't mean in a normal way. They've always been excellent athletes. What got me was that all of a sudden they were too good. Todd was a linebacker and Jim the quarterback. Jim would hand the ball off to Todd, and no one could stop him. He wouldn't even bother dodging. He simply mowed down anyone in his path. Guys would crumble, as if he were made of steel. When Jim would pass, he'd throw tight, clean spirals that could barely be seen. When one of his passes hit a receiver, the guy would double up as if he'd been shot. Those passes hurt, and I mean hurt. The coaches thought it was great, but I saw the guys staggering off the field, shaking their heads and clutching their stomachs, refusing to come back. That happens all the time in football practice, Angela said. Mary ignored the remark. Then there were the girls. Kathy was head cheerleader. I'd watch the squad practice, and they'd do some kind of pyramid thing, and Kathy would come from out of left field and vault onto the top of the other girls. She'd leap up 10 feet easy, right off the ground. That's not possible. Mary went on. I began to watch those three, Jim, Todd, Kathy. You might think that's weird. After all, Jim was my boyfriend. Of course, I didn't need to watch him. I saw him all the time. But the truth was that I wasn't going out with him much. He didn't call me as he had, and when I was around him, he was aloof. But that wasn't all there was to it. He had changed in some way that I couldn't explain. He would talk about the same things, but you know that feeling you get when someone's talking about something that they don't really believe in, or they have no interest in? Yes. I felt Jim was just mouthing words because it was expected of him. He would hold me. He would kiss me. We continued to make love when my parents weren't around. But he wasn't with me. He wasn't there. So, Angela said, he was losing interest in you. I'm sorry, Mary, but it happens all the time. It doesn't mean he was a monster. Mary showed impatience. I tell you, he was different. And I know what I'm talking about, because I knew him. His mind, his heart. When I was with him, they weren't there. Where were they? Angela asked. Gone. Angela shook her head. I still don't know what you're talking about. If he acted so indifferent to you, why did you go to the trouble of watching his practices? Good question. I think I went because I needed proof that he had changed. Mary. Let me go on. There was a time, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, that I went to practice for only a few minutes. I accidentally left my purse and had to go back for it. When I got there, none of the guys were on the field, and all the cheerleaders appeared to have left also. I noticed that the weight room was still open and walked over to it. By then, I had no hope left for Jim and me. I didn't walk into the weight room. I peeped in slyly. Yeah, I was definitely looking for something unusual, and I got it. What did you see? Angela asked. Kathy and Todd and Jim were inside. They were alone lifting weights. Have you ever seen a cheerleader lifting weights? I haven't, but I suppose that isn't so strange. But good old Kathy, she wasn't pumping a few extra pounds to give her arms tone. I saw her lift at least 1,000 pounds straight over her head. That's impossible, Angela said. I know, but I saw her do it. You must have misjudged the weight on the bar. No, in fact, the bar she was using bent after she lifted it. She had so much weight on it. What do you think it would take to bend one of those metal bars? A strong girl, that, Kathy. Were Jim and Todd lifting as much? I couldn't tell. They were working the machines. But it seemed as if they were pushing the machines to the limit, without sweating. Here's something else. When Kathy made her dramatic lift, neither of the guys seemed to notice. The whole time I stood there watching them, not a single word was said. The atmosphere was cold as a morgue. Angela considered. Anything else? Yes. Mary leaned forward on the table. She had begun her tale with no hope of convincing Angela, but now she had warmed up. Now it was clear she wanted Angela to believe her. After the incident in the weight room, I began to spy on them. I noticed that they hung out together a lot. They'd go off alone to a corner of campus and talk. I also noticed that none of them ever smiled unless someone else was around. I stopped going out with Jim altogether, but I often drove over to his house at night and sat down the street in my car, waiting. For what? Angela asked. For him to come out and play with his strange friends. You talk like they were vampires. Mary's eyes grew dark. They were worse than vampires. One night I was waiting outside Jim's house. It was after midnight, and he went out and drove off in his car. I followed him as he picked up Todd and Kathy. They went here, to Bolton, to a bar. I assumed they'd be tossed out because they were underage, but they stayed inside until 2 o'clock, when the bar closed. When they came out, they had 2 couples with them. The other 4 appeared to be in their early 20s. They were all laughing and carrying on. It was obvious to me the new people were drunk. I was sitting across the street in an all-night coffee shop. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I caught the words party and orgy and warehouse. Jim and Todd and Kathy were trying to convince the 2 couples to go with them, and they must have done a good job, because the others got in their car and followed Jim as he drove away. I had to hurry to catch up with them. Jim headed to the edge of town. He parked in the deserted lot of a boarded-up warehouse. The others parked beside him. They were still laughing and talking out loud as they followed Jim and Kathy and Todd inside the warehouse. How did they get inside if it was boarded up? Angela asked. Jim pried the boards off the door with a crowbar. Why didn't he pull them off with his hands if he was so strong? I don't think he wanted to demonstrate his strength. Yet. Those 2 couples must have been awfully stupid to go into a warehouse that was clearly deserted, especially if they thought they were going to a party. I told you how drunk they were, Mary said, and you know how sweet and innocent those 3 could look. They could pose for a picture on American values for a Christian TV station. Anyway, the point is they went inside. I stashed my car down the block and waited outside the warehouse behind a stack of crates for them to come out. They did, about an hour later. At least, Jim and Todd and Kathy came out, not the others. What happened to them? Angela asked. Mary leaned an inch closer. They were killed. Our innocent All-Americans murdered them. You saw this? Mary sat back and waved her white bandaged hand in disgust. Of course I didn't see it directly. I told you I waited outside. But when Jim and Todd and Kathy emerged, they were carrying those giant green plastic bags you put garbage in. They each had one thrown over a shoulder. They threw them in the trunk of Jim's car and drove off. It made me wonder. I walked back to my car and got a flashlight. I returned to the warehouse and crept inside. At first, I didn't see anything. The place was empty with dust everywhere. I called out, but no one answered. Then I saw this area on the floor. Here, all the dust was brushed away. Mary stopped and shut her eyes. She took a deep breath, then another, but seemed not to let either go. Angela found herself leaning forward. "What did you see?" Angela asked. Mary opened her eyes. She shook her head. "Blood." "Blood?" "Blood." Mary lowered her head to stare at her bandaged hand, perhaps thinking of the blood that was now on her hands. Most of it had been wiped away, off the concrete floor. They were careful, but not careful enough. There was still blood left to see. There were no bodies? "No," Mary said. "Torn clothes? Bloody clothes?" "No." Mary looked up wearily. "I think our dear classmates took the clothes with them in the green garbage bags." "I thought you were implying that the bags contained the bodies of the two couples," Angela said. "Hardly. The bags were not that big." "Then the bodies— What are you saying, Mary?" Mary met her eyes straight. "They're monsters. What do monsters have for dinner?" Angela was appalled. "They didn't eat them, for God's sake." "I don't think God had anything to do with what they did to those four." "Mary." 7 people went in that warehouse, Angie. Only 3 came out." It was Angela's turn to close her eyes and shake her head. Shake it all out of her head, she wished. These awful images Mary so easily invoked. Super strength, strange appetites. All this from a girl who had killed 2 people only 12 hours ago. What was she to believe from such a person? Nothing. She could believe none of it if she wanted to be sane. Mary's raving. She can't accept what she's done and she's invented this fantasy. There are no monsters. Angela opened her eyes. "Why didn't you go straight to the police and tell them what you'd seen?" she asked. "I wouldn't have been able to prove that Jim and Todd and Kathy had killed the 2 couples. But the people at the bar would have been able to confirm that they all left together, and you had the bloodstains on the warehouse floor." I did go back to the bar. But to the owner, it had been just another night of faceless people. He couldn't remember anybody. I also went back to the warehouse a couple of days later. The bloodstain had been washed away. "By who?" Mary shrugged. "Probably by them. I think they began to suspect they were being followed." "What makes you say that?" Angela asked. "It was just an impression. The next time I saw Jim, he looked at me funny." "What was the name of the warehouse?" "I don't know if it had a name." "Do you know the address?" "No," Mary said, "but I could show it to you." "Could you draw me a map to it?" Angela asked. "I don't think so." Angela nodded. Mary was dodging every chance to have her story verified. It was all an illusion. "You should have gone to the police if you believed you saw what you did," Angela said. Mary exploded. "And tell them what? That I saw a cute little cheerleader lift 1,000 pounds over her head? That my ex-boyfriend eats people? I would have been shown the door faster than you could blink." "Mary," Angela said patiently, "they're not going to show you the door now." Mary quieted. "I had to do what I did. I had to stop them while there was still time." "What do you mean?" Mary was defensive. "Nothing. You've told me this much. You may as well tell me the rest." "Why? I can see what you're thinking. Mary went berserk and now she's concocted this crazy story to try to explain why." "That's not true," Angela lied. "It is true. I told you you wouldn't believe me." "Well, do you? See?" Mary was angry at herself. "I must have been crazy to think you would." "How come the 2 couples were never reported missing? That would have been big news in these parts." Mary frowned again. "I don't know why. I suspect, though, that Jim and Todd and Kathy only picked up people who were passing through." "You think they killed people every night?" "I think they had strong appetites." "Look, what do you want from me, Mary? All right, I don't believe your story. It's too ridiculous. If I was in your position, and I told you the same thing, you wouldn't believe me." "That's true." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Angela asked. "I don't know if anything can be done." "Because Jim is still alive? Because he's still on the loose?" Mary nodded gravely. "Yes, if he made a couple of partners. I don't know why he couldn't make another too, or thousands for that matter. Now the world's in danger of being taken over, is that it? Mary nodded again. What I wanted to say a moment ago and didn't was that the day before the party, I saw our happy threesome talking with Carol McFarland and Larry Zurer. Carol and Larry are monsters now? Maybe. Why didn't you kill them as well? They were at the party. I wasn't sure they had changed. Strange as it may sound, Angie, I don't just go around shooting people because I feel like it. All right, let's pretend for a moment that everything you say is true. I don't believe it is, but let's say I do. What happens to these people that change them? I don't know, Mary said. But you must have an idea. I don't, Mary said. But if Carol and Larry have become like the others, then it's an interesting coincidence. Carol's a cheerleader. Larry's on the football team. Why don't you tell Lieutenant Nagoyan your story? What for? You know me, and you don't believe me. What are the chances he will? Nagoyan thinks it might be a bad idea for your lawyer to try to get you out on bail. He fears Todd and Kathy's families might come after you. Mary waved away the suggestion. They won't do anything to me. Jim's the one who'll try to get me. Will you try to get out? Angela asked. I don't know if I should answer that question. The answer is yes, but I suppose Nagoyan knows it already, so I guess I don't have to worry about it. Personally, I think you have plenty to worry about, Mary said. Because the world is about to be overrun by aliens? I don't know if they're alien. I don't know if they have the strength to overrun the world, but I have no doubt that they'll take over Point in the near future. Angela glanced at her watch. Is there anything else you want to add to your story by way of proof? 2 more points. You were there last night. You'll remember how Jim was on the 2nd floor when I shot Todd and Kathy. You'll remember how he immediately realized I'd go after him next. What does that prove? Angela asked. Nothing in and of itself, but it's interesting that he knew he was to be next. You should see the significance. Then there was the way he dived out the bedroom window onto the roof, dropped 12 feet to the ground, and dashed into the field without breaking stride. I would dive out a window if someone was coming after me with a shotgun. But you bleed, Mary said. You'd get hurt. You hurt Jim when you shot him in the leg. I'm sure he bled. I wonder how badly I hurt him. I'll ask him. Angela started to stand. He's here at the station. Mary reached over and grabbed her arm. Her eyes were wide, scared. Stay away from him, she said, a note of pleading in her voice. He's dangerous. Promise me you will. I rarely see Jim. I don't think it'll be a problem. But he'll know we talked. He might come after you. Angela reached down and removed Mary's hand from her arm. I'm capable of taking care of myself. Mary sat back and smiled sadly. That's what I thought, too. Angela didn't know what to say. She told Mary she'd talk to her soon and left the room, leaving Mary chained to the chair. How sad, she thought. Mary had had so much potential. What a waste of a life. Angela hoped the court saw fit to place her in the hands of a competent psychiatrist, rather than behind strong bars. Nagoyan met her in the hallway and led her back to his office. He offered her a seat, but she refused. He asked her what Mary had said. Nothing, Angela said. You were with her more than 10 minutes, Nagoyan said. You must have talked about something. Nothing important. She won't talk about last night. Angela spread her hands. I'm sorry. Nagoyan stared at her a moment. He had the warmest eyes, and she felt guilty of lying to him. But she saw no point in relating Mary's story. If Mary herself wanted to tell him, that was one thing. But Angela would have felt as if she were betraying her friend to talk about her friend's monsters. Nagoyan finally nodded. That's fine, Angela. He led her to the door of his office. We have your number, don't we? Let's stay in touch. If anything new happens, be sure to give me a call. I promise, Angela said. Is Jim Klein here? He left a few minutes ago, Nagoyan said. How is he? Nagoyan smiled. You asked that when you came in. Angela nodded. You're right. She flashed a smile. I just thought I'd ask again. Goodbye, Lieutenant. Thanks again for saving my life. Thank you for coming in, Nagoyan said. After Angela Warner left, a uniformed police officer brought in a cassette tape and a tape player and placed them on Nagoyan's desk. The officer left, and Nagoyan rewound the tape to listen to the conversation between Angela and Mary. He had, of course, listened in while Angela and Mary had been in the room. If he felt any guilt about eavesdropping on the 2 girls, he was unaware of it. A horrible crime had been committed, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. That was his responsibility. Angela was right about Lieutenant Nagoyan. He was very good at his job. What struck Nagoyan as he went over the conversation again was not so much what Mary had said, but the strength in her voice. She was not a flaky teenager. He remembered how she had stood up to him in the woods. She had more guts than most of his soldiers in the war. But what about her story? It was preposterous, of course, but it disturbed Nagoyan in ways he couldn't explain. Long ago he had learned to trust his intuition, even above reason. But what was he to do here? The boy Mary had tried to kill, Jim Klein, perhaps he was a murderer. Nagoyan had personally interviewed Jim and had not liked him. The boy was hiding something. The way his eyes had darted to the left and right when he was being questioned had reminded Nagoyan of a caged animal. He was guilty of a crime. Of that Nagoyan was sure. But Nagoyan couldn't spare the manpower to have Jim followed, not day and night. He doubted he had the legal right to have the boy trailed anyway. It had impressed Nagoyan that Angela had not divulged Mary's story. Those two were friends. That had not changed with the events of last night. Perhaps that friendship could be exploited. When the tape was finished, Nagoyan pushed the button on the intercom on his desk. He got one of his men, Officer Martin. The man had helped him capture Mary the night before. Any word on Mary Blank's bail? Nagoyan asked. She won't get a hearing with a judge until Monday, Martin said. Can you postpone the hearing? Blank's lawyer will complain. They always do. Have the judge be ill when it comes time for the hearing. Ask him as a personal favor to me. I don't want that girl getting out. She's dangerous. I understand. Anything else? I want a list of all the boarded-up warehouses in Bolton, Nagoyan said. Can you get it for me? Sure, Martin said. What do you want it for? I want to sweep a concrete floor, Nagoyan said, to see what I find.